to introduce a prime minister of a country, a European country, that has really been at the forefront when it comes to defending freedom and democracy, and to a certain degree also has paid a price. The prime minister of a very courageous government, the prime minister of Lithuania, Šimonytė.
Distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be in Copenhagen and to speak about democracy, the backbone of Western statehood, so natural to us, almost like the air we breathe in, that it is so easy to start taking it for granted. Yet only a distant dream for millions of people in the 21st century who are still having to struggle for it. And so threatening, apparently, to autocrats worldwide. So that we must keep fighting for democracy each and every day, both home and abroad. When Lithuania was rebuilding its statehood in the 1990s, Denmark and the Nordic countries were always there to help our young but fastly growing democracy. We will never forget this invaluable support. Thank you. Back then, many of us looked and still are looking at the Nordic countries as a pinnacle of democracy, where the values shared by a Euro-Atlantic community are practiced each and every day. Free and fair elections, freedom of speech, individual liberty, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of other nations. These fundamental principles unite the free people across the world. Students of Tiananmen Square in 1989, on Bolotnaya in 2012, or across Belarus in 2020, wanted these principles to be respected within their countries. People demanded more democracy, not more autocracy. Then, this in itself was a crime in the eyes of the regimes that stay in power not by popular vote, but by force. No surprise that democratic principles and the rule-based international order could be seen as posing a threat to autocrats. In their view, a world order is divided into spheres of influence. They introduce notions of sovereign democracy or multipolar world. They demand not to impose Western values so as to disguise, and poorly so, an ambition of safeguarding and empowering their own autocracies. Economic dependencies, be them from Russian oil and gas, or on Chinese supplies, technology or investment, easy outreach via social media, and freedom of speech abused by propaganda outlets, today generate ample opportunities for autocratic regimes to use asymmetrical tools to undermine democratic institutions. And it seems that our innate goodwill helps autocrats quite a bit too, as they see it as our naivete. Do we still trust that economic ties, as a rule, would entice authoritarian regimes to accept our democratic norms? Or wouldn't our economic resilience to those regimes serve us better? Through recent years, Lithuania has gathered quite a collection of examples of the means autocratic regimes use to bend our worldview to their liking. In our recent history, Moscow abruptly stopped oil supply to our oil refinery, largest in the region and very important part of our economy by that time, for technical reasons, as pipeline Druzhba, which ironically is translated as friendship, allegedly needed some repairs. not surprisingly, the repairs never started for 15 years and counting. At about a similar time, gas prices Russia was charging Lithuanian consumers became the highest in Europe, as the single gas pipeline was connecting us only to Russia. Not to mention multiple times where Russia now and again, for false pretenses, would close its borders for dairy products or other goods exported from our country, thus generating losses to our businesses while trying to turn them against the government and pressure authorities to become more understanding towards Russia. How did we react? The only way is possible, to my opinion. Since dependence on one major energy source opened a room for blackmailing us, we closed this room by diversifying our sources of supply. We have an oil terminal and have commissioned an LNG terminal called Independence. Since the very first day of operation, this brought our energy prices back to the market level. And now, all the investments in our energy independence enabled us, as this spring, to become first EU country to completely refuse Russia's oil, gas, and electricity. And our dairy business what about it? They found other markets where their products are appreciated for what they are offering, high quality. As to our other autocratic neighbor, Lukashenko's regime in Belarus, the past year was very eventful for us too. It is no secret that after stolen presidential elections of 2020 by Lukashenko, followed by massive popular protests, a number of Belarusians were forced to seek refuge in neighboring countries. Lithuania is pleased to have welcomed thousands of freedom-loving Belarusians. However, to capture one of those not appreciative of the regime, Lukashenko went as far as forcing Ryanair flight heading from Athens to Vilnius to land in Minsk, capturing his victims, a then independent journalist and his girlfriend, and taking more than 170 passengers as his hostages for long hours. Later last year, Lukashenko orchestrated a hybrid attack instrumentalizing irregular migration. Thousands of migrants were lured into Belarus and later pushed into the EU through the borders of Lithuania, Latvia, or Poland. We quickly adopted the necessary legislation and policies, asked for the EU to support us, and the support came quickly. That allowed us not only to withstand this cynical attack, but also to stop unnatural, manually orchestrated flow of immigration so that human suffering caused by Lukashenko's regime would not get worse. And of course, one doesn't have to be a neighbor to try to exercise economic pressure as a means to achieve the political goals, or as a means of pure, unsophisticated punishment for your free choices they happen to dislike. At the end of last year, we've experienced China's undeclared economic sanctions just because our country left the format then known as 17+1 and allowed to open a Taiwanese economic representation in Lithuania. China's reaction was completely asymmetrical, as it went not only after Lithuania's end product, temporarily erasing Lithuania from China's customs databases, but also targeting Lithuania's inputs in many value production chains in the EU, therefore directly aiming at EU's single market. We rallied the democratic countries' support, aiming also for the adoption of EU anti-coercion instrument. At the same time, the case was lodged against China's government in WTO. In my eyes, when challenged by autocratic regimes, Lithuania chooses the only option possible. If you do not want to compromise on your values, build your own resilience where you can, and rally the democratic family of countries for solidarity. Don't be mistaken. This is not a purely idealistic approach. It's deeply pragmatic too, because policies shaped by values are the most viable way to secure own interests. Because only in the environment of trust and rule-based order can one be sure that other players in the field will play a fair game. Hence, values and interests are not contradictory. They are mutually reinforcing. Those are Lithuania's experience and lessons in dealing with some non-democratic regimes of the world. Frankly, the challenges we faced, however big they seemed at that time, are minuscule to compare with the challenges Ukraine is facing today, literally fighting for their democratic values and their survival as free and sovereign nation on the front lines. By now, it should be quite clear to all of us how we got there. Ignoring or compromising on fundamental values, letting dictators off the hook can be detrimental. Putin has not faced consequences after his brutal invasion in Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014, or his war crimes in Syria. On the contrary, he saw inability of the West to introduce strong sanctions. History teaches us weakness and appeasement will only increase aggressors' appetite. As a result of our appeasement today, we are dealing with much larger tragedy and much greater threat on two fronts. First, Putin is waging a genocidal war against the Ukrainian nation. Families are killed in their homes. Civilians are slaughtered in shelters and on the streets of hundreds of Ukrainian villages and towns. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are sent to Russia through filtration camps. Putin's regime aims to annihilate the whole nation just because they have a distinct Ukrainian identity. Second, Putin's war is an attack on democracy. In his sick worldview, Ukraine belongs to Russia's sphere of influence and has no right to choose its future, its set of values, or which organizations to join. Definitely not the EU or NATO. Of course, his contempt for democracy goes far beyond Ukrainian borders. A democratic Russia, one with accountability, free media, and open debate, would have never invaded Ukraine. Putin is desperate to show that the Russian non-democratic power system is more efficient than the democratic one. He counts that the West will get tired of the war in Ukraine. He counts that the democratic leaders who are vulnerable to electoral cycles and polls will seek a quick end to the war in Ukraine. Of course, under Putin's term. It should be clear to us today that the credibility of the democratic world is put to test in Ukraine. This is the 1938 moment of our generation. It is a fight between democracy and autocracy, not a local conflict. A fight between freedom and sheer brutality. This is a dividing line today. The line has never been clear since the Second World War. Democratic community needs to help Ukraine with everything we can. Our arsenal of democracy today is much greater than it was in 1940. So what do we need to do? First, we need to maintain our unity. Democratic nations, the EU, NATO, G7, and like-minded partners showed extraordinary unity which shall be strengthened further. Let's stay firm and let no cracks to appear. Second, we must further increase and speed up supply of heavy weapons to Ukraine. At this moment, this is the best investment for restoring the peace in Europe. Thirdly, we must further broaden and strengthen sanctions against Russia. A complete decoupling from Russia's energy resources is key. Sanctions on Belarus should be increased too, because Lukashenko's regime is an accomplice. Sanctions do work, but their effects are not immediate, so we must be patient and consistent. Fourth, Ukraine should be given EU candidate status. It is our moral duty and our strategic interest to open the EU doors for Ukraine. These are critical steps for Ukraine's victory. These are critical steps for the future of democratic community as well. We must show that democracies are capable and are efficient in defending themselves and in helping each other. I believe that Ukraine's victory is also very important to the future of Russia. A defeat on the battlefield for Putin is a necessary step towards a normal, democratic Russia at peace with itself and with its neighbors. Today, the choice is very binary. Either we save Putin's face, or we save Ukrainian lives. And the hope for democratic Russia. The contempt by Putin's Russia for truth and for the fundamental international law, its military aggression and shocking war crimes in Ukraine shall serve as an eye-opener for those voices who argue that European security architecture is impossible without Russia's participation. A dangerous and erroneous paradigm that, if unchanged, would keep a part of Europe in a vicious circle of instability with a constant threat of war. The war in Ukraine is a dramatic but also a defining moment for the future of the world order. History suggests that new international systems emerge after a seismic event, such as a major war. What kind of a new system will we build as the aftermath of Russia's war in Ukraine? Will it be a system where an aggressor is condemned but also allowed to keep a bit of the stolen land? Just a bit? And maybe tomorrow another bit? What kind of world order would that be? The bravery of Ukrainians, the ongoing fight of Belarusians for free Belarus, and the examples of many other nations standing up to autocracies across the world give us good reason for hope. Hope for peace, hope for the power of the human spirit, hope that the rules-based world order and democracy can endure and prevail. The battle between democracy and autocracy, be it in Ukraine or other place, will not be won in days or weeks. But if we stay faithful to our principles, build up our resilience, strengthen our alliances with like-minded nations in Europe, in Americas, Indo-Pacific, Africa, and help each other, then the world will definitely emerge as a safer place for democracy. Today, our arsenal of democracy is much stronger than ever before. We are just not using it fully, as though we are afraid of our own success. Slava Ukraini! Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for your words, for your actions, and for your inspiration. We are now going to move on and introduce to you Thomas Roden. He is the chairman of the Danish China Critical Society. He is going to moderate our next session, Standing Up to China's Authoritarianism, Parliamentary Perspectives. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you so much, and welcome to this session that I have been looking so much forward to. I know you're all waiting for Obama, but this will be nearly as great. So today we are going to talk about China and the rise of China and the authoritarianism that they are putting all over the world. And with me here on stage, I have a wonderful panel of parliamentarians from all over the world. On the first, from Taiwan, rock star and independent member of the parliament, Freddie Lim. Welcome to you. From Uganda, a member of the parliament representing the Democratic Change Party, Lucia Kello. Welcome to you. And from India, also member of parliament, Shwet Kumar. Welcome to you. And Shwet, let's start with you. I think that this topic is really interesting because we are seeing right now the rise of China in all of the world. We are seeing how they are trying to be more active in Africa, how they're trying to threaten the countries that they live nearby. We are seeing how they're using economic pressure on countries who are trying to stand up against China. As a parliamentarian in a neighboring country to China, who have been working a lot of on China, what have you been doing, and what do you think parliamentarians should do on this issue?
Thomas, let me give some context here. The India-China border was by and large peaceful for a very, very long time, since the 60s. But for no rhyme or reason, in the year 2020, China suddenly had incursions into Indian territory, started